During this short presentation, Femina Europa will show you what is at stake with the so-called sexual and reproductive rights that the United Nations organization is seeking to impose. We will first expose the UN agenda about sexual and reproductive health and rights. Then, we will see the implementation of this agenda in our country. And to conclude, we will give our insight about what should be women's rights. In 1994, Cairo in Egypt hosted the 4th International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD. The conference introduced a new human right called reproductive health. You have to know that to this day, that self-proclaimed basic human right is not accepted nor recognized around the world. So, let's see how the UN is trying to push forward reproductive health as a right. In 2000, the Millennium Development Goals were introduced, and reproductive health was inserted in Goals 3, 4, and 5. So it was not a goal in itself, but it was an important component of MDGs. In 2012, a so-called high-level task force for ICPD was set up in order to push forward the agenda of sexual and reproductive rights. This body of 25 experts declared in 2014, sexual and reproductive health and rights are cornerstones of women's rights and gender equality. This is another step. The word sexual is added to reproductive. The question is, why? Why is sexuality introduced as a human right? Is sexuality the cornerstone of women's rights? Don't you find that this way of thinking is a very narrow approach compared to the large needs of the women, such as education? Yes, what about universal access to education for women? The focus here is only on sexuality and reproduction. And so, no wonder that in 2015, we see these sexual and reproductive rights appear amidst the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The 17 SDG goals were set in order to end extreme poverty and hunger, fight inequality and injustice, and tackle climate change by 2030. But what does it mean really for UN to ensure access to universal reproductive rights and health? Is it really for the well-being of women, of children, of families? Where are the men? Let's go a bit forward. Those sexual and reproductive health and rights are promoted by the World Health Organization, WHO, as you can see in this publication. We would like to underline the subtitle Human Reproduction Program of the booklet, including all the UN agencies, and the official partner of the program, IPPF, International Planned Parenthood. What does that mean? Does that mean that contraception and abortion are the cornerstones of women's rights? Nothing else? That this program is all about monitoring women's fertility through contraception and abortion? This is extremely disappointing. The Human Reproduction Program has an agenda in 2 points. Comprehensive sexuality education is a tool to sexualize children from the very young age and to promote the UN reproductive rights agenda to the youth. Our presentation will focus on the first point, sexual and reproductive health services and rights. First, let's have a look at the definition of sexual health given by the World Health Organization in this document, Sexual Health, Human Rights and the Law, published in 2015. It says that sexual health is related to sexuality, sexual practices, contraception, and sexually transmitted infections. In fact, the whole document promotes contraception, abortion, hormonal therapies, and gender equality according to the gender ideology. Maternity protection, maternal health are cited only once and only in relation to the people engaged in sex work. The answer to the issue of maternal mortality, as you can see, is contraception, as if education, better maternal health care, were not the adequate means to reduce maternal mortality. Look at what WHO declares about unsafe abortion on his website. WHO declares that unsafe abortion can be prevented through comprehensive sexuality education, emergency contraception, and provision of safe and legal abortion. How can they say that because abortion is medical, legal, it is safe? In France, we just had the case of a woman who was amputated of both legs and arms after an abortion performed in an hospital. Abortion is never safe. It can be less dangerous if performed in a hospital, but it is always a trauma for the woman. Abortion is a violent interruption of a natural process, and we can't ignore the post-abortion syndromes for women. And of course, it is not at all safe for the fetus. Isn't a WHO statement totally deceiving? In the 2015 WHO document, not a word about the impact of hormonal treatments on women's health. WHO seems to forget his own advice given in 2005, showing the risk of cancer linked to the use of contraception. Are women guinea pigs for pharmaceutical industry? Not a word also on the impact of contraception on the environment, on water for instance. What about the principle of precaution? Many studies have proven that chemical hormones are toxic for the environment, but still millions of women swallow this poison every day. France is a good pupil for the implementation of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Do you notice that same-sex marriage is also part of the UN reproduction program? France ratified 2 binding international conventions. In 1983, the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and in 2014, the Istanbul Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. We all agree about the elimination of discrimination and violence against women. The problem is a gender ideology inserted in those 2 conventions. Gender is not the answer to violence. In 2013, France created the High Commission for Equality, Haut Conseil à l'Égalité, which steers our national policy to take into account the Istanbul and CEDAW conventions, as well as the UN Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, at all levels: education, health, culture, budgeting. What is the result of this integrated policy? Did it improve the well-being of French women and men? Let us look at the statistics. This one shows the high level of violence in France, especially against women. The UN conventions are not delivering their promises. Gender policy is not the answer to the problem of violence against women. On the Contraception Atlas of the European Union, France has one of the highest ranking concerning access to the so-called modern contraception. Despite a strong promotion of chemical contraception, comprehensive sexuality education, France has also a very high level of abortions and has twice more abortions than Germany. So our policy again is not successful. We also have a problem in France with freedom of speech concerning abortion. It is very dangerous to speak against abortion in our country. A law was voted against abortion obstruction in 1993 and reinforced in 2017 towards the pro-life websites. For this year, 2020, a bioethical law is under study, which will extend the right to abortion until birth in some cases. It seems that in France, the so-called Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights program implies always more and more abortion and contraception. But there is hope, as we observe a widening gap between state policies promoting abortion and contraception and a young generation of women sensitive to ecology, to sustainable development. Those women speak freely about natural fertility methods. They want to act being more respectful of the environment. They are keen on restoring the link with men and are eager to reappropriate the control and meaning of their bodies. To conclude, Femina Europa is concerned by the real needs and desires of women. We refuse to see human rights twisted, as do the so-called UN sexual and reproductive rights. Femina Europa values women's identity in its full dimension and in complementarity and reciprocity with men. We need men as they need us. Restoring the relationship between men and women is the cornerstone of a happy sexual and reproductive health and rights policy. Femina Europa promotes the necessity of human ecology as a rediscovering of the interactions between man, woman, and nature. We want a real free choice for women, reconciling work and personal life. We value the invisible and non-market work carried out by women within the family. We work for the consideration of motherhood in our societies and the development of a sustainable women's health care. Thank you.